might just get off the ground because we have also people who are just learning about Web3 social, and that's why they're here to learn more about what each of these different ID or infrastructure layer projects do. So who wants to get off and start with a quick intro about the project?
With the microphone. Wow. Hi. Okay. Hi, I'm Sebastian from Polygon. I am the project lead for Polygon ID. Polygon ID is an infrastructure where you can build a self-sovereign identity solution. So we provide tool sets for all the actors. You probably have heard that there are people issuing credentials, there are people consuming credentials, there are people holding credentials that they present. Well, we provide tools for the entire ecosystem, and our goal is for people to use our network. Right? We open source everything. We're quite open with our innovation. We're especially strong in zero knowledge and very minded with privacy. And yeah, our goal is to make as many relationships with wallet providers, issuers of trust, or even SSI builders and DID users, so we can empower them with this innovation. Thank you.
Hey guys, I'm Sam Baffa. I'm with Spruce.ID. Spruce is a company that focuses on centralized identity, both on the web or Web3 and just also governments. So for Web3, we created signing with Ethereum, and we really try to build tooling around it to make it really easy for DApp developers to give really great capabilities to their users. So yeah, it's a little bit about what we do at Spruce.
Hey everyone, I am Adam. I lead partnerships and business development for Ceramic. We are a decentralized data network. We partner with a lot of the folks up here to allow DIDs to interact with the data that lives on our network. We've just released today ComposeDB. It's a graph database. It's built on top of the Ceramic network. It's all accessed by DIDs, and so users can control all of the data that lives inside of that network. And DIDs are incredibly important and foundational to the approach that we take to how our data lives on a decentralized web. Skull reach. Sorry.
Cool. Okay. Just don't want to pull anything off that table. Sorry. I'm Johnny Howell. I'm the co-founder and head of strategy at a company called Disco. Disco is your data backpack that you get to carry around the metaverse. So we are built on top of Ceramic, some other technologies as well, DIDs, verifiable credentials, and we really are focused at that user experience layer. I know some of the teams up here are providing much of the infrastructure that we're really interested in building on top of, and to kind of take more of an opinionated approach to what we think, the user experience and the actual feeling of having a decentralized identity could be like, right? So you connect your wallet to Disco. It's a place to get all of this data, see it on your screen, click, explore it, share it, do those things, make it private, make it public. So yeah, we really sit at that application layer over a ton of the things that we'll be talking about here.
Great, well, so great to have the panel here. And again, my name is Hannah. I'm a core contributor to Next.ID. Like Johnny said, we are a decentralized identity aggregation protocol focused on being able to create identity graph that allows the dApps to build upon, and also other protocols to supply more on-chain and off-chain profiles information too. All right, so to kick off our discussion, I think for a lot of the developers here, maybe you've already looked into what DID methods are, verifiable credentials, etc. But I think for maybe some audience here, who here has heard about DID for the first time? Oh, awesome! We have a really educated audience. Okay, so we'll skip the 101. We have the panel here. We see really an ecosystem around DID being built around the current tech stack. So could you guys share a little bit more where you think the overall kind of from the development angle DID is at, from infra layer, database, application, where do we need to kind of focus more on in terms of building?
It's a really big question, and I'm sure we all have different opinions and approaches. At Spruce, we think about the public-private key pair as like the main like primitive we work on. So we're pretty chain agnostic. You can use like basically any public-private key pair. And the benefit of DIDs is that the public key is now addressable, no matter where it's from, no matter what chain it's on. So if we consider DIDs as the main identifier, we can, like, things massively become interoperable. Yeah, and then also you can prove that you actually are in control, right? If you have the private key, it's just a great way to authenticate, and also you can maybe authorize things. So yeah, just really powerful technology for interoperability. Yeah.
I can build on that. I went to an event late last year. You guys were there, the Internet Identity Workshop. Or yeah, I think that was it. And one of the fascinating things to me at that event was looking at the number of DID methods that exist and how the usage amongst those DID methods is all kind of on the same level. There's no kind of standout usage yet. And so for me, I think one of the interesting things, you mentioned ecosystems earlier, and I think of all the ecosystems around specific DID methods and use cases for those DID methods are going to be what we need to start seeing more of, to start seeing kind of escape velocity for the types of applications that use them, because then we'll be able to start to kind of grasp what like really value looks like for the users. I think today there's still a lot of abstraction for users between what the technology actually does and looks like, and how we talk about it at a very technical level, and a kind of productized, smooth user experience, which we're starting to see more of. I mean, data backpacks are trying to get there, and I think it's we're making a lot of progress, but there's still clearly a lot of work to do.
Yeah, so we have a ton of people who are familiar with DIDs. Has anybody want to raise their hand and tell me what you've done with your DID? Anybody done anything with a DID? Yeah, what did you do?
I created one, I published it on chain, I resolved it, I added some delegation.
Okay, what DID method do you know?
Ether.
Ether DID, cool. What about verifiable credentials? Anybody have one? What'd you do? What is it, and what kind of value did you get out of it?
I mean, I've done it for like demo purposes.
Okay.
So like I've done like I got like a credential for like attendance.
Okay. Somebody else raised their hand on it verifiable. Do you want to share what it was and how you used it?
It's a piece of paper. It's in my backpack somewhere.
Okay. Interesting. I'm very interested in your physical verifiable credential. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think my thing I'm trying to get at is like, we're all familiar with DIDs, we're all familiar with VCs. We have a couple of people that have some experience with them in hands-on way, but we really don't have, in my opinion, a ton of people getting value out of verifiable credentials yet in their DIDs. We know about these things, and they're still kind of underutilized. So like, we need use cases. We need to make it super easy. Like, that's where Disco's mission is kind of on this point where we're relatively agnostic at the on some of the DID method stuff. I trust really smart teams to figure out a lot of that, and we want to make it get a piece of software in people's hands that's really easy to onboard to, and start sending credentials to other people for whatever reason you want, and start being able to receive them and give it developers an easy API for their applications to get them from the user. Because I've worked in the space since 2016 on DIDs and VC stuff, even kind of before those standards were before they kind of emerged and solidified. And it took me like 4 years before I ever sent my first verifiable credential, right? Because I'm not a developer, I'm a product designer. So yeah, I think we're ready for the tools and the buttons that allow us to do this stuff easily. And there's a lot of great experiments waiting to happen with all of these technologies, and I hope ETHDenver and the hackathon pushes some of that forward. So next year, every single person here will be like, I used a verifiable credential to get into this party or get a discount at a swag store or something. Even if it's small, I think we just have to start doing those things, because I talk to teams all the time. They just get lost in the sauce in documentation world and all of the different implementations and all the different ways these things could be combined. So I'd like to see us the product teams out there be a little bit more opinionated and just make some calls and just start building some stuff.
Just on verifiable credentials and game usage, verifiable credentials, you have like issuer of the credential, the person who holds it, and someone who verifies it. So it is an ecosystem, and like a lot of startups deal with this ecosystem problem, right? We're trying to bootstrap both multiple sides. So I think for getting usage, it's maybe finding these key people, right? And at Spruce, we were really thinking about like who were maybe biggest issuers of credentials, right? Maybe governments, right? These credentials matter, and proving them matters, and making sure they're legit matters. So this is like maybe this can also lead like a verifiable credential ecosystem where it's like, oh, there's already this really big incumbent user. Maybe we can also use this credential issued by this government to say, hey, I'm not on a sanctions list, let me transact, or I'm able to do X, Y, and Z. So there is like kind of a little chicken and egg problem with verifiable credentials and usage in the ecosystem, but I think we're beginning to see traction on multiple sides, in and out of it. So.
Okay. Honestly, I don't know what is left to say, but so I'll tell you what the reason why we are doing this in Polygon, right? You say that there are hundreds of DAD methods and they are equally used. Say they are not used, and people with verified credentials are not using it, right? Something we know, we think firmly in Polygon is that there is a lot. We always talk about mass adoption, bringing people to Ethereum, bringing people to Web3, use cases, etc., etc. The first time, in my first event like this, I told my colleagues that for me, Web3 would look like lots of solutions looking for a problem, right? That was my first impression of Web3. And I've been in tech for, you can see the hair, white hair, so I've seen some shit. And this was lots of good solutions, technical, perfect solutions without a real problem. And what convinced me to move to this company and this project was I could clearly see that there is a lot of use cases that will not be unlocked until we solve the challenge of identity. So if we cannot trust users, if we cannot build reputation like in the real world, we cannot expect to have cases like in the real world. It's as simple as that, right? Now, why hasn't this happened yet? If it's so urgent and the pressure is so high and we really need it, right? I mean, if somebody should be caring about self-sovereign identity and decentralization, are you guys? I mean, if you don't care about that, if you're not using any of these things and you're still using your Google account to log into things, right? What does that tell us, right? Well, that tells us that probably we're trying to compete with the wrong guy. We're trying to compete with the login. That's not who we should be competing with. We need to elevate our game. We need to really bring real world trust into Web3. And that means open dirty boxes and ugly boxes like biometrics and KYCs and crap that nobody likes, right? So I would say DIDs, verified credentials, have the potential to use all the power of these ugly technologies that we don't like in a way that is still privacy preserving and we still want to use it, right? Because until we have really useful verified credentials that do way more than a login, right? Nobody's gonna do it because the login with Google is faster and easier.
I think in terms of login approach, maybe our friends from Spruce have something to say. Well, I guess the question is like just a quick follow up on that. Like we're like a lot of people are still like using like Google, Google, Twitter, like wherever like popular apps are, and that's kind of becomes like your default identifier. So like with like signing with Ethereum and Spruce, like how do you think about kind of the angle to compete from the login space?
So ultimately, we kind of think about it from like inverting control, from like control being with a centralized provider to being with the user. With Spruce, we call ourselves user control maximalists. We want the user to be in much of control as possible of all their data and everything they do. So first, it's getting control of your identifier, like if you're on Twitter and your identifier is like Sam, right, or SK Boffa is my Twitter, I could get banned on Twitter and now I can't log in on Twitter anymore, right? So you're no longer in control of just this core part of how you access things, right? Maybe you signed into something really important with your Twitter account and now you're banned. So if you using like your private key, right? Nobody can take that from you. We use it robustly in like just regular crypto, right? Financial crypto, to move like billions of dollars. And to secure billions of dollars, we can also use it to secure our data. So if you are able to say, hey, this is my data, I'm going to permission, my data lives here, I'm going to sign a statement with my keys and say, I'm giving permission to XYZ to be able to access ABC. This is now like a totally different perspective. Then I have to upload my data to some place and trust them that like, hey, please protect it properly, don't get hacked. Please don't sell to somebody. Instead, I can really be in control. So signing with Ethereum is kind of like the tip of the spear in letting users be able to control their identity.
Sure. Again, build on that a little bit. So we talked a lot about ecosystems, and we need a variety of tools to actually enable those use cases. So sign in with Ethereum is kind of that user-facing access, part of that ecosystem. What we're providing is the actual data infrastructure layer to allow users to store that data in a way that allows them to control it and delegate access to applications that want to use it and build upon it. And so I think the next part, and what we're all probably here looking for, are developers who are also building applications on top of these infrastructure components that actually use this. And so I think what we're starting to see now is we're starting to see first of all, developers and builders wrap their heads around this idea and kind of take this kind of concept of user control beyond just kind of your keys and your crypto to actually your data as well, and being able to kind of use your data and apply your data in ways that haven't been in kind of the norm for what we all have seen for applications in this world. So I think we're all here looking for folks who are coming with creative ideas for how to use that data. And I think that the interesting part that we're also all interested in, but it's one layer deeper, is the composability of that data and the ability to actually have users assign their data or use that same set of data across applications, to be able to take your data in your backpack and move it across your experiences on the web, to be able to log in with your did and not have it just know it's interacting with one application, but being able to see how that implies what is happening to your data across applications that are reading it. And so that's what I'm excited about. That's what I'm here for. And I think what we're all talking about builds upon what the vision is that we're all looking to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I think following up with what the two of you guys were saying, there are a lot of I think building blocks right now in the space, and then definitely feel like as protocol developers ourselves, what matters at this stage is thinking about different use cases, and that's something that everyone's been teeing up a lot. So I want to delve a little bit deeper into what are this was probably really kind of end user facing right now, where you guys interface a lot with developers and other people who are interested in at least verifiable credentials, and with other projects you are developing a builder ecosystem right here. So curious to hear what are the use cases you've seen so far, and then I guess another point that I have is for users end users to eventually care about self-hosting their identifier, your DIS, your private key, or having these portable social graph. What are some of the interest or compelling narratives or product ideas that you see that truly would get that message across? Because I think folks here, we definitely care a lot about not trusting the third party, but that's a really hard pitch to even university students, and not to say my mom. So just curious to hear more ideas coming from your angle.
Yeah, of course, if you've been to any of these talks and read these blogs, watched these videos, you're going to hear a ton about what DIDs and VCs can theoretically do. One of the things I always think about is the adoption curve of tokens and what that would have, and how that actually went, right? So there was this big push for enterprise blockchains and private blockchains and these tokens that live on these other networks, and there's all this all these theories about how Ripple can work with Western Union to use tokens to solve these problems. The only place it really took off were all of the really peer-to-peer user-facing things, and that happened inside of Ethereum, and still we're kind of waiting on real adoption at the enterprise level, at the government level, all of these, that will come, but most of this stuff, most of these disruptive technologies start out as toys. They look trivial, they look dumb, they look meaningless, they look like it's just a bunch of people building for themselves. And that's always kind of the refrain. I think verifiable credentials will likely have a similar adoption curve. And so I think we should not be afraid to use verifiable credentials in ways that are just fun or building for our own teams and teams we work with and experimenting rather than trying to bite off more than we can chew and trying to do, full-on KYC, citizenship. Like I've worked on many of those pilot projects, and they're pilots. They never go beyond the pilot stage. You put out the press release and you say you've had an innovation, and then nothing happens. It's been going on for like 6 years. And so that's what I want to see us do more of. And so that's kind of what Disco's just trying to make it super easy for DAOs, right, to issue credentials to their members, right? That's a problem I hear about in every one of these DAO workshops, is how do I recognize work in my DAO that's not represented on chain, right? And in a non-transferable way, right? So if they give them tokens, then that's not great. So a lot of systems a lot of DAOs are moving to a 2-token model. They have a transferable token and they have a non-transferable token. But with the non-transferable tokens, I think maybe some of us would maybe disagree or agree on like the whether the verifiable credential standard is a better substrate for trying to represent these things. They're cheaper, more scalable, private by default, a lot of those qualities. So I think that there's like a lot of room to do some stuff there. That's what Disco is personally super excited about, working with a bunch of DAOs and just being like, what does it mean to use verifiable credentials to govern who has what roles and who's done what in your DAO? What does it mean to actually have a community run on top of this stuff in real life, in production? And it'll start in DAOs, but it will go to larger organizations. That's what our hope is.
Building on top of that, there are two really exciting ideas to me. One is the idea of these credentials and these tools being used for network states, and to build new kind of societies where it is cryptographically verifiable, and you can make claims and you can say, hey, I have this credential that lets me access this building, right? So it's kind of really similar to a DAO use case, but I think it's a really important primitive in this new kind of I don't know, thing, right? New kind of nation state. So I think the tooling here, having being able to sovereignly own maybe a network state, sovereignly owning its data, where its data lives, all that stuff. Yeah, it's it enables really cool new possibilities. And another totally different use case is this company. It's called Second Voice. It's an AI company that's aimed at using your heart rate. This heart rate measure called heart rate variability. It measures how. It's a really good proxy for how well you're doing. If you drink, it goes down. If you meditate, it goes up. Right? It measures the gap between your heartbeat. They want to basically use the current state of the art large language models, even do something record everything you're saying, right? And the privacy preserving part of me is that's terrible. Let's not do this. But when you have an architecture, if you have a data vault where maybe everything you're saying is being recorded and then turned into embeddings and stored in your data vault, and your data vault also can do some local computation, right? And you can say, hey, I want to get embeddings on XYZ, right? On my heart rate data, right? I'm wearing it measuring my heart rate all the time, 24/7. Maybe I don't want this going to a single company, right? So the companies of the future, where to unlock the kind of really powerful capabilities that we have as individuals, you maybe need a certain level of trust, right? I don't trust any company to record everything I'm saying. right? But maybe I do want to record that for myself. So I think these technologies enable just like new things to be built because the levels of trust are higher. Because for one, is like backed by cryptography, right? Like you have your data vault, you can only permission it with a signed statement. You're giving access. Maybe there's local computation. So I think these are the kind of things that maybe they're hard to see today, but these are just core primitives, right? In the same way blockchain is core primitive that has led to all the things we have now, right? Smart contracts and stuff. It's really worth like thinking about what the world looks like in 2030 and working backwards to like where we are today with like data vaults and verifiable credentials. So.
So since many use cases have been already explored, I'd like to maybe express something about how to choose or how to decide if you're a developer, you're an application developer, right? There is probably nothing, or there shouldn't be anything more important to you than user experience, plain and simple, right? That should be the cornerstone of whatever decision, especially when you decide whether to include a new paradigm, include a new component, integrate to another service or protocol, right? The reason yes or no is this going to improve or worsen my user experience? And I like to tie that with the idea that I put before of liquidity of credentials. Now, and I know these are the bad guys, but think for a second why the login with Google, login with Facebook was such a big deal in such a short time. It was because liquidity credential. It was because the chances of that user in front of the screen having one of these two, right, was like 99%. So 99% of your users get a better experience because they have a super big liquidity of credentials. Well, any other way of identifying your users that you choose in Web3, right, that is not either using Ethereum addresses or is not using, DIDs based on Ethereum addresses or verifiable credentials, is going to have less liquidity of credentials because governments and companies like Microsoft, like European Union, they are all pushing forward verifiable credentials. So if you want to, you shouldn't do it for privacy. You should. I mean, all that is good. Is okay. Honestly, I'm talking from a probably 80% outside of Web3 perspective guy. Nobody cares about privacy. Not even the people in Web3, right? So that's like a second benefit. That's another reason to do it, but that's not the main reason to do it. And that comes from a company that is the pinnacle of privacy when it comes to identity, right? But we realize, guys, we're not going to sell this because of the privacy. People, it's just another benefit, right? But I'm telling you, if you want to have an application that can leverage all the effort that these big companies, European Unions, Microsoft, all the work they are doing to bring people into verified credentials, you can use it, right? That should be the only reason to decide whether or not you want to include that in your applications.
So I think a lot of the use cases that we're talking about like all build on each other, and so kind of like the base primitive is identity and how we can represent an individual in a decentralized way. I think that the necessary next step is how do we represent that individual's relationship to either other individuals or other pieces of data that they own, and so very naturally what emerges from that is a social graph, and so a lot of what we're here today to discuss is exactly that. And then on top of that starts to build this concept of how do you measure the impact or the value of the interactions of that individual with either other individuals or applications or other sets of data. And so we start to see this kind of reputation use case emerge. And then I think once you have that core set of primitives, you start to see a lot of usefulness around organizing either DAOs or any other kind of collaborative organization. We work with a team called Lateral, which is organizing researchers that are outside of institutions and trying to figure out what questions to start pursuing answers to. And the way they do that without having to host a symposium by UC Berkeley is by coordinating in a decentralized manner who has which credentials for specialization in certain areas of knowledge, And they can then vote on which questions they want to pursue. The next step there is to organize funding around that, and I think that's where kind of this continuum of concepts comes back to value with crypto, and how do we start assigning value in this paradigm of all these other decentralized primitives that start to create a lot of usefulness around these kind of social graphs that emerge. So it's kind of a recursive argument, but I think it makes a lot of sense in kind of trying to understand how what we're all building builds upon each other and starts to lead to really interesting use cases that aren't just identity, reputation, and collaboration. Like we can actually start looking beyond that to like core value producing use cases.
Thank you, Adam. That's very well said. I think there's also like it's a pendulum shift where like things like earlier today, our first panel was about like kind of the social dApps and then how like the non-financial like use cases like in Web3 and then this like growing kind of awareness of like adding the human layer to on top of like just like identify like crypto like wallet identifiers. But eventually it will like kind of maybe congregate into like being able to like do fundraise or other kind of like really building up to the possibility of having like network states down the road. So there's really definitely kind of a I think back and forth or like kind of a evolution in terms of financial infrastructure and a social layer, and then on top of it like more value to be created, more production and consumption to be created in this digital economy. And I do want to like follow up a little bit more because we talked about like a lot of I think broader use cases and some of the projects that you work with. Specifically, now that we're at ETHDenver, like with the developers that are like building on top of like Spruce, Ceramic, Polygon, and like working with the Disco like hackathon, for example. What are some of the dApps developers, like maybe a lot of them are here, what are some of their ideas and get you excited, or things that you're like, huh, like that could be interesting?
Yeah, one thing a couple actually things I'm excited about. There's a team called Discrete.Labs. They're relatively new, but I know the CEO, I guess, or one of the founders of Discrete.Labs is one of my friends, Kames. We used to work together on early self-sovereign identity stuff at Uport, and what they're doing is super cool, and we've been working a lot with them at Disco. So one of the first things that we built that we'd love to see more, experimentation around is that, they built an NFT drop site, right? You can mint an NFT, but you can only mint this NFT if you have this off-chain verifiable data. And so you pass the data, in a traditional verifiable credential way, to the front end, and what they issue you is a just-in-time access control that is time-bound. That is the call data in your transaction that you call to the contract, and if that little just-in-time access control is valid, you can mint from the contract, right? So only people that hold this off-chain data can mint these NFTs, and so they've taken this a step further, and they're working with Disco and they're working with Cello to do impact cards that are VCs. I think they're maybe launching that sometime this week. And they are able to issue credentials in their front end, and there are these impact cards, and they verify, they do all of their business logic. And then when they issue that credential using Ceramic and Disco, when they come to Disco, it's there, right? They don't, MetaMask doesn't allow you to take custody of your off-chain data, right? So you need an interface to be able to have that tangible, visceral experience for regular people of like, it's not just, they're not gonna pull up a, JSON, right? So they need a place to see their credential and have that kind of skeuomorphic experience of this is an object I care about, that I'm proud of, and I want to display. And so that's just because we're building on this interoperable layer of DIDs and VCs and Ceramic, they issue those credentials in the front end, and then they could just say, hey, whenever you want, at your convenience, go log into Disco, and there will be a credential waiting for you on your profile, and then that's a place they can start accruing more and more credentials, right? So that's I'm super excited about that kind of coming to life and seeing more people build things like that. And we're talking to a number of hackathon teams that are interested in doing very similar things. So we're just trying to coach them through that process, as it's still fairly kind of a new pattern.
we're seeing a number of like really compelling use cases. I talked about one with Lateral and kind of the research community. One of the other teams we're working with, DAOs and Systems, so that is kind of like a consulting team for DAOs, is seeking out data that currently lives in centralized databases inside of these organizations whose ethos is very decentralized, but don't have tools yet to actually operate on top of all this data in a decentralized manner. And so like they're working to find a lot of these kind of like centralized pockets of information that tends to be either, you know, single user control, and sometimes those users disappear, and with it, any access to that data. A lot of teams that are building verified credentials, like Johnny was talking about, the assign use case, assign roles in DAOs and can program those roles. One of the use cases that tickled me the most, kind of just emerged out of the ether for us, no pun intended, was the government of Norway was looking for a way to manage investor data that complied with GDPR rules, and so is like looking for user-controlled data constructs that allow the user to remain, if anybody's familiar with the GDPR laws, the actual data controller, which was, it's not a mature idea yet, it's still kind of proof of concept stage, but like was a really, you know, interesting bridge to kind of what Sam was talking about in, you know, having governments start to think about how this can be a privacy-preserving tool that complies with the laws that we have accepted today.
That's cool. One, I guess, company or use case that is interesting to me is Collab.Land. I think a lot of us are collabing with them. Yeah, I think they're focused on building a system, like Collab.Land lets you prove that you're a member of Discord or something, right? First focusing on like the user in Discord, whether or not they have like a key or not, Ethereum key. They're really focused on how do we make these tools accessible? How do we give this Discord user verifiable credential and storing this in like data backpack or data vault, either or, making sure they're interoperable for whatever users. So they're kind of trying to set this kind of nexus to make sure all this technology works together. So I think that's a really interesting place, interesting thing to be a part of, as I think a lot of us are. And yeah, that's it.
Who here is not collabing with Collab.Land? Oh, really?
Charles, we got to get you on.
Well, a quick plug for our friend at Collab.Land. They're launching their marketplace, so like more like DApp developers, I think, were able to like really build on top of them and then be able to like tap into a very substantial like real like wallet, like millions of like wallets connected, and like even more like untapped like I think users that could be benefiting from a lot of the Web3 technologies.
Well, in our case, it was a journey. Our tools allow for such a big number of use cases and applications that initially we struggled with Web3 because we would publish all these SDKs, libraries, and people would say, okay, where do we start? So we had actually better adoption with governments, organizations, big companies. All the KYC providers in the world loved us. But it was difficult to explain, okay, the amount of things you can do with this. So we focus on 3 very specific use cases, and we're going to be pitching them and demoing and teaching people these 3 use cases for the next months to see if people start with something, right? And they are very simple. They are proof of personhood, proof of humanity, proof of personhood, proof of uniqueness, and reputation scoring, right? Because if you add any of these 3 to your application, right, suddenly is, oh, what if I could really trust every user to be a user and not a bot? Or even more than that, what if I could trust every user not to have duplicated accounts or have a reputation that goes forever, right? Because they cannot just cancel that account, open a new one, and misbehave, right? So maybe if I can count with all these things, right, the amount of things I can open, right, the business models I can think of will expand, right? So now we are being more focused on these 3 things.
I think a lot to unpack here, and then in terms of like use cases, for example, like an Next.ID, we're also focused on first like being able to prove like my digital avatar, like who I am, across like both like off chain, like my social media in Web 2, and then like on Web 3, and then like building on top of it. Like, you know, you can build like reputation score based on like, oh, this is my social capital on Twitter, like with X amount of followers, and these are the different like wallet addresses that shows like my participation, my assets across different chains. So like kind of mapping out that identity graph. So it sounds like I think that there are some like similarities in terms of our approaches and how we want to think about like really building on top of the, like you said, the liquidity of identity, like through collaborating with projects that already have like a lot of user base that are solving real problems, or just like with like real world stakeholders that do have this need for data privacy and all that. So in terms of operating, like I guess collaborating together, or like thinking about a sustainable path forward for like different like identity related like projects, how do you guys think about like your like growth model and like your operating model? Like and like a lot of like it's all open source. So I guess like I'm asking this because like we get asked a lot about this question from like maybe investors or like other people who are hearing about like what we're building together as an ecosystem for the first time, and then that's something that pops up. So I'm curious, like how would you respond, or how do you think about like across different projects and different DID methods, like collaboration?
Okay, I'm gonna take the first question because I think there were like 4 or 5.
Sorry, I like fire post. Every time when you guys were saying something, I was like, oh my god, this is something I want to follow.
I'm gonna take only the first one. So there is an aspect of identity has many aspects and social uses. The most, I would say, technologically the easiest one to solve for right now in Web3 is the positive social reputation, or things I want to brag about. So if I don't have any issues showing that to the world. That is when a lot of people are finding that is efficient and is a good solution to just mint an NFT, right? Because I want to show that I am a member of this DAO, or I am a big contributor to this repo or whatever, right? So if it's about your visible you, right, and things you want to show, there are many solutions around NFTs. Now, the thing is, when we try to use these as signals along with other private information to build reputation, like, hey, I want to take your Twitter activity and your commits to this repo and your age, maybe it's a factor, right? The more private I get to get these signals to be the reputation scoring now, then having things on NFTs and on the open are again not an option, right? So we're still again reverted to verifiable credentials and all the things that we have discussed, right? So, but I think if you look into the landscape of identity solutions in Web3, you will feel that NFTs have a lot of presence, but every time you check the use cases they are solving for, they're usually in that sphere, like the positive social reputation.
Shilling and improving that a big well type of thing. Yeah.
Being at the application kind of layer for Disco, I mean, we're super excited to build on all 3 of these companies, right? So like, we don't have sign-in with Ethereum support yet, but one thing that will be fun to talk about is, one of the things I'm keeping my eye on at Disco is account abstraction and the future in which key pairs are, kind of handled differently, and we have an abstract identifier and we're not just our key pairs. So I know that that's something we all should probably talk about, and I'm interested in that. And so like, if we can figure out, if sign-in with Ethereum has that type of support in the future, making sure that's all locked in and compatible with the account abstraction future. We're already building on Ceramic, would love to use Polygon ZK query language, for when we start doing more ZK stuff around sharing of these credentials. So for us, we're like, yeah, like the interoperability, and all of this ends up, being, transmitted into Discord via the Collab.Land bot, right? Like I think it really will naturally come together, and that's the beauty of these things. Of course, there are some things to, there's already some hidden complexity in the interoperability. If you go and you know, you look at some of the plug fest stuff that some of the educational groups that have been working on this have gone through. There's like 70 different implementations of the combination between the verifiable credential standard, whether it's JWT or JSON LD, plus the DID method, plus the credential presentation layer method stuff, and then the networks that the DID methods are rooted on, and what type of resolver they're using. There's a ton still. I think if there's a matrix out there in some Excel file that is mind-numbing, and it just shows how far we have to go. So that's why I'm really focused on like these narrow, even Web3 specific use cases right now, where we all, you know, when you go to IIW, there's like tons of other teams, right? There's very few teams that sit at the intersection of the place, this community and that community. And I think we have the opportunity in our teams to actually get, maybe it seems small right now, I really do believe in thinking narrower and smaller rather than trying to boil the ocean and just getting something done. Like can DAOs, can it just, you know, the way that Snapshot, right, and a couple other tools are really fundamental to the way the DAOs work now, the Malak contracts and stuff like that. How could we get, at least in a narrow place in this space, get a hook in, you know, and it just becomes kind of even a socially kind of enforced standard around, this is just the way DAOs typically build, right? Maybe it's NFTs, maybe it's DeFi, maybe it's payments, there's stuff to explore all there. But DAOs seem most ripe because there's an inherently social aspect to it, and having that here like social, I think of, okay, data needs to transfer from one context to another context. I need to prove something about myself to somebody else that wasn't present at the time of this other interaction, and that's where my, you know, the alarm goes off, like, okay, there's something there. So I'd love to, you know, we're super excited to build on all of that stuff at Disco and make some of that stuff come true.
I totally agree with Johnny. I think finding like a really narrow use case that has a high adoption potential is going to be what inflection point really, an inflection point that really opens this up for us. I feel like we're starting to see that a little bit with another partner and another sponsor here today with Gitcoin. Gitcoin Passport is being very widely adopted throughout a variety of projects to kind of get at that proof of humanity, proof of uniqueness, especially with the protocolization of quadratic funding. I think you're going to start to see a lot more adoption across a number of DAOs and a number of other organizations that are interested in adopting that specific passport. And I think it's a great growth vector for all of us to be able to kind of focus on an incredibly useful and tangible case and help kind of add rock and fuel behind it. We're super excited to be working with those guys, and I think it's a really high potential single project that we'll see adopted throughout the community.
I think that was really good. Let's continue.
To say one more thing is your question about the being open source, right? This is a question that we get very often. When you tell people that they can integrate your product as their identity layer, it's like a marriage. It's worse than that. I mean, you're really taking control of a lot of aspects of their application and their future, right? So it's a hard decision to decide, oh, you know what? The identity of my user, which is my goal, right? It's gonna be in your hands. They want to know how you plan to make money, right? That's and there is a number of proofs of concepts and projects that were on pause for some time because they really figured it out. Okay, guys, I know where you're going to charge and what you are going to charge for, because we are open source, we all collaborate, everything is good, right? But this, once you step into one of these identity solutions, it's going to be probably for the lifetime of your business, right? It's not easy to move out, although it's full of standards, everything is interoperable, etc., right? You are changing the paradigm for your users, right? So this is I just wanted to highlight that this is something that we get a question we would ask.
Do you have answers for it yet? Or
Yeah. We have to have answers. For us, it's quite simple because we are an infrastructure provider. So for us, it's all about the usage of the network, right? Some of the aspects of our protocol require the use of smart contracts in our network. And of course, you can take the smart contracts and move it to any other EVM blockchain, but you have to maintain them and keep them secure, etc., etc. So the value of keeping these smart contracts working audited, etc., is going to retain people to stay on our network. And the use of our network is our final monetization strategy.
On that point, for Spruce also is another open source company where everything we do is open source. Like, there is this like lock-in, right? Like if you're like, all right, I'm adopting this library, it's like, okay, I'm really committing to it. So for us, ultimately, like thinking about monetization, thinking about what this is, we look at storage. We look at probably like charging for storing your data. You can, of course, store it yourself. Our libraries are open. You can run your own nodes, and they can sync with other nodes. And we can talk about Kepler some other time. But ultimately, it's like software as a service. But all the other services are all open source. You in the same way like WordPress, you can use WordPress.com, or you can just run your own WordPress server. Like most people will just use WordPress.com because maybe it has like templates or has they're just these like nice to haves. And so that's kind of like our approach. And being an open source company, for us, it's really important to really listen to our customers and our users and people who use our libraries and put issues up on GitHub. And so for us, being open source allows us to be like, hey, like it holds us to a higher standard. It's like working in a restaurant with an open kitchen, right? Like you have to do everything like well. You can't just be sloppy because people are just watching you. And you have to hold yourself to a higher standard. So for us, that's our approach. Build good stuff open source, and then if people want it to be managed, make sure that we're trusted and that we do that well.
Yeah, so any of your developers are like your first like wave of like early customers and adopters too. Like that's really the beauty of it. I would love to get into more like the account construction, the smart contract wallet stuff. We are at time, like my colleagues are, but we will be running workshops on like how Next.ID and work with like smart contract wallets tomorrow, and that's definitely something we would love to continue the conversation for. And then a lot of things around like privacy and ZK. We could like probably chat with the audience offline. But yeah. Overall, like, thank you guys so much for sharing your insights. I think I really appreciate a lot of the honesty about what's going on in the space, and then like kind of like what do people care about, how do we get more developers and users eventually onboarded into this new paradigm. Yeah, so thank you all so much.